Let me ask you a stupid question. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody who's of a different political persuasion than you, and it was difficult? It was upsetting. Sure you have, either online or in person or both. And I have a suggestion for you that really might make a big difference. I suggest you read the book, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and or watch his many good TED Talks. He has such a different perspective on the differences between liberals and conservatives that it will completely change the way you think about these conversations. And you can bring up that body of work that he has in the book during those conversations, within those conversations, and it totally changes the tenor and flavor and productivity of those conversations. It really does change the conversations. I've done it many, many times. And as soon as you bring up something from that book, either one of the many interesting studies that are in the book, or the many interesting different perspectives, or even the main principles of the book, you bring those into the conversations when they start to get tense like that, and it completely changes the conversation. And I think changes the perspectives of the people involved in a way that the whole country really, and the whole world really, needs to change their perspectives. It's such an interesting and different point of view on the differences between liberals and conservatives that, in my opinion, this is what we need in the world. We need Jonathan Haidt's work in the world. We need it. We need more people to know about it and to have it as part of their world, part of their worldview. And if we did, there would be a lot less division in this country and in every country. It's like he's probably, I'm sure at some point he was thinking, why am I studying this obscure topic in the early part of his career? And now I feel, and I'm sure I'm not alone with this, feel that he's got the perfect body of work for what we need right now. One of the main ideas in the book is that we have 5 moral foundations. Actually 6. They've added a 6th one, a potential one. And this is not just Jonathan Haidt's work. This is the work of other moral philosophers and psychologists and evolutionary biologists working on this topic. And so the 5 are care, fairness, authority, loyalty, sanctity. And just so you understand a little better, care is as opposed to harm, fairness as opposed to cheating, authority as opposed to subversion, loyalty as opposed to betrayal, sanctity as opposed to degradation. And then they have a 6th one that they've proposed to add to this as liberty versus oppression. So liberty being the value and oppression as being its opposite. So what does all this mean? So the first difference between liberals and conservatives is liberals rate really high on care and fairness, and relatively low on authority, loyalty, and sanctity. And conservatives rank fairly evenly on all 5 of them. When you're in those conversations with people, especially online, but even in person, you don't even have to remember everything that's in the book. Just encourage them to read the book. Just have more people know that this book exists, or that, if you're online, you can leave links to the book or leave links to his TED Talks. Just get his work, Jonathan Haidt's work, out into the world and have more people aware that what they're doing with their sort of tribal righteousness about their own party is not good. It is transcendable, I should say. And that in itself would really do some good, I think. But anyway, back to the back to the let's go with the 5 moral foundations. The 6th one, they're not even sure that that's a real one, and the 5 is good enough. But so there's this difference between the strength of the commitment to those values. Care and fairness is really high in liberals, and the other 3 are fairly low. And with conservatives, they're more even, and none of them are really high. It's more balanced, you could say. And I mean, just looking at them, they're more evenly, the amount of commitment is more even between the 5, and it's really high in care and fairness for liberals. But there's also differences within any particular moral foundation. For example, fairness is one that there's a conservative and liberal difference. And this sounds really pedantic, and I know I'm kind of getting into like maybe overly detailed descriptions, and hopefully I'll give you some more ideas of how this is relevant and useful. But let's just look at the difference here between fairness. So conservatives think of fairness as, if you do a certain amount of work, you should get compensation for it. If you do more work, you should get more compensation. So depending on how skillful or how able or how hardworking you are, you should get more reward. That the focus for liberals is more like everybody should get an equal shot. So if there's somebody that's been in an underprivileged situation as they were growing up, and they didn't get the education and the advantages that somebody that was more wealthy got, then they should be compensated or boosted up. They should get preference in colleges, for example, over people that are more privileged. They should get maybe money, whatever. So they're, it's kind of trying to make everybody have an equal start, equal opportunity, or at least that's one aspect of the way liberals think about fairness. So they think differently about it, but they both really care about fairness, and that's important to note that liberals and conservatives both care about. Actually, liberals and conservatives both care about all 5. And that's an important foundation for connecting us together. There's another one I thought was interesting is originally they thought that basically liberals aren't much into sanctity. That was one of the 5 moral foundations, sanctity, like purity, sanctity. Conservatives think of that as, for example, saving yourself for marriage, not sleeping around, or not being sexually degraded or whatever, in that sense. And liberals really, in general, don't have that as a really high priority or have that as a strong value. However, Jonathan Haidt pointed out that there is a kind of sanctity that many liberals do have, and that is what goes into their body and what is being done to the earth, for example. So they want to have food that is sustainable and doesn't have GMOs in it, for example. It's a kind of valuing sanctity or purity. So anyway, so they have these moral foundations, but they express them differently. Now, why are they different? That's one of the interesting things. How did these differences come about? They think that there's a basic, really fundamental element in the human psyche / biology that is the difference between being someone who seeks novelty, who likes novelty, and someone who fears novelty or distrusts novelty. And This is something that can be measured even in an infant, whether they reach for something unusual or whether they pull back from something unusual. And this basic difference over time can develop into either a liberal or conservative. Liberals being the ones that seek and like novelty, conservatives being ones who want things to stay the same or return to the way they used to be, kind of thing. They don't want, they're more resistant to change. They fear the consequences of change. And as you can see, both of these are perfectly valid points of view. Change does often lead to something worse. And that's the conservative point of view. Change does, in fact, often lead to something worse. And there was a time when things were better in some ways, right? So that's true. It's also true that some things need to be changed. And a lot of times change is good. So both of these are equally valid, or I don't know what you call it, okay. But they may be fundamentally biologically different. People that become conservatives and people who become liberals, they may be very different. And then they tend to congregate. I thought this was interesting. Liberals tend to congregate in cities where there's all kinds of weird new things and things are constantly changing. And conservatives tend to congregate in rural, smaller towns where things kind of stay the same. One of the reasons I think it's important to know the differences between liberals and conservatives is because to recognize that these differences are valid and maybe even biologically based, but for sure valid. The points of view of the two are valid, at least the underlying values. And because a lot of times the way people are now is they really don't understand the other side. They can't understand why somebody would think that, why somebody could even consider themselves a conservative or a liberal. It's like they're crazy. The other side is crazy. It's insane. How could they be that way? How could they believe in that? Like they really don't recognize what it is that they are valuing. And once you understand it, it's really easy to see. Like I follow on Facebook, I follow conservative and liberal, sites, people, sources, and news. And it's really easy to see now what each side values. Like I don't see either one of them as crazy. I mean, of course, there are crazies in both sides, but for the most part, you can understand and recognize the underlying values that is being expressed by that. And it's really interesting to watch how both sides, especially when they argue with each other, neither side gets the other side. It's just like they really don't get it at all. Like how could they possibly think that? And a lot of times I'll see on a conservative site, they'll say something about clearly they just want babies to die, talking about how liberals are more in favor of women having the right to get an abortion, for example. But the point of view of the conservatives, not the reasonable ones, but like the really off the deep end ones, is like, well, clearly liberals want babies to die. They have that kind of, and I've seen that on both sides where people are just so they so have it such a difficult time understanding the other side that they really have no clue why somebody could think that way. So that's the first thing right off the bat. You will notice that you understand now. Whatever side you're on now, you understand now why the other side thinks the way they do and believes the way they do and votes the way they do. And that's valuable. There are so many interesting things in this book. It's a big book, but it's totally worth reading. And they have it on, it's available on as an audiobook too. I think it's worth listening to 10 times, really. Soak it in, really get to know it really well, and have a lot of those things on the top of your head when you're in conversations. And it really does illuminate the conversations when you start talking about this stuff. Human beings, you and me, have a need, or at least a desire, to be a part of a group. And this is usually in opposition to other groups that are not us. So, and I mean, people obviously do that with race, but they do it with religion. They do it with their, football team. They do it with their political persuasion. They just naturally do this, right? So that's part of the craziness you see in this, in this political divide. Your brain and my brain give us a blast of dopamine when we've done something good for our tribe. And this is the righteous mind at work, right? This is where the rubber meets the road in this thing. You get a blast of dopamine. You get a reward in your brain when you side with your tribe against another tribe. And it is kind of addicting. I mean, it's the same kind of blast of reward you get from heroin or cocaine. It affects the same part of your brain in the same way, and therefore it's addicting. And you can see the evolutionary value of this. Obviously, for most of our evolution, we have been tribes competing with other tribes. And your loyalty to the tribe and your desire to justify them and to make them right and to believe that they're in the right is really built in. And it takes a little bit to transcend it. And this body of work really does help you transcend it. And it helps you help others transcend it so that issues can be talked about like issues, not like whatever you say, you're wrong. And whatever my people say, my side says is right. And that's the way we naturally have evolved to be that way. And it clearly doesn't work, and it's very dividing. Back in the olden days, back in the 90s and before that, people in Congress used to move to Washington, D.C. and stay there. And they would get to know each other. They would become friends, both sides of the aisle. Their kids went to the same school. Their wives knew each other, etc. And so there was, it's an old-fashioned way of saying it. I know that there were even, I don't know when the first woman congressperson was, but back in the good old days, back in the 90s and before, it was mostly men, and men in Congress, and they all knew each other, and would have parties together, and they were friendly with each other, both sides of the aisle. And I mean, obviously not always, but there was a lot more friendliness. And then Newt Gingrich came up with the idea that people should spend more of their time back in their hometown and only come to Washington, D.C. in order to do the votes and stuff like that. And that changed something really fundamental and really important. Now the people from opposite aisles have really separated themselves and have become more tribal. It's become more extreme. Anybody that's old enough to have lived through the 80s and 90s and beyond have had this feeling that something important has changed. Well, that's one of the things that's changed. And it's definitely, you're not making this up. It has definitely changed. There's more division than there was before. And that division isn't really helping things. And I believe that Jonathan Haidt's work, being more broadly understood, would really go a long way to healing that division. Another thing that has changed is that people are more likely to live in a bubble of information. Because when you search on Google, for example, Google figures out what you're looking for. Kind of like Google gets to know you, and so starts giving you results that you're looking for. And Facebook does that, YouTube does that. They always are trying to figure out, the machines are set up. They're not, it's not like there's anybody trying to figure it out, but the machines are set up to figure out what you want and give it to you. And so you live more and more in a bubble without knowing it. It's giving you results that it knows you want, and you're not getting contradictory information as much. So then when you do get a different point of view, say you're a liberal and you get a conservative point of view, it just seems crazy. It seems how can anybody, with all this information that you have about the world, how could they possibly think that? Because their bubble is getting a whole different body of work, a whole different body of knowledge, and so these these two bubbles are have diverged more and more over the last 20 years. And then also, if you and news outlets have diverged also. News sources have diverged. There's actually 3 news sources that I get that are really unusual, in the sense that they try to give you both sides. One's called The Flip Side. It's a newsletter, comes out 5 days a week, and it's like, here's a news item, and here's what the left says about it, and here's what the right says about it. And what's the other one? Know Here, Knowhere. Is also does the same thing. Tries to give you the liberal point of view, and it gives you that one is really cool. It gives you the story, and then it gives you, here's the left headline and here's the right headline, and it's really interesting because the angles are totally different. And once you know what these 5 moral foundations are, you can see that you can easily see why the values within that headline, within the way that headline is skewed. It's really interesting. Anyway, but most people don't have the opportunity to have this kind of both sides point of view. They, have one news source or one main news source, and that news source has a certain angle to it, and it's usually liberal or conservative, one or the other. Very few, now that I've been, having this point of view about the different moral foundations, I haven't seen any main news sources that aren't either liberal or conservative slanting. So, but a lot of people think that they're listening to MSNBC, and it's just straight news. It's liberally slanted. And people that listen to Fox News, they think that it's just news. They don't recognize it doesn't feel to them like it's slanted. Liberals think of Fox News as being conservative and slanted, but Fox News portrays itself as being a balanced news source, and the people that follow it think of it as a balanced news source. One of the things I got from the book is, once I understood both sides and the values of both sides, I realized that you really don't want one side to always win. They both have legitimate and important values, and it would not be a good world if the liberals always won or the conservatives always won. It's important that these two really stay in conflict. All we're trying to do really is to make it a civil conversation, to make it that we're talking about ideas and what's going to work, and not get hysterical or overly emotional or tribally one-sided. That each side could see the potential value of ideas in themselves, and not be so tribal is the right word for it, where you're just like, whatever your side says is right. Whatever the other side says is wrong. Even if it's a good idea, it's wrong because the other side said it. We just need to stop that. If people could have a civil discourse about these ideas, we don't have a problem. That you can keep your values. We can still have two parties or more. But what's causing a gridlock is this absolute tribalism about it. And this body of work can really go a long way to help separate the tribalism from the just differences in opinion. If you study this stuff, when you get in those conversations that are sometimes difficult, instead of being exasperated or upset, you'll be sympathetic to the other person's point of view. You'll understand what values, and you'll sympathize with those values. And it makes the conversation go so much better. And also, it makes, because your state of mind is so sympathetic, it really helps you get your point across to them, to reach them, and to influence them easier and more effectively. One of the underpinnings of Jonathan Haidt's work is that we are a cooperative species. Everybody knows that. That's a really core part of what it means to be a human being, is we're a cooperative species. And we have been evolutionarily selected to bind together with each other against common enemies. Haidt makes a compelling argument that we don't reason out our position politically. We lean one way or another naturally, and then our mind finds reasons why. That's why your arguments, when you're arguing with your friends that are on the other side of the aisle, that's why those arguments don't seem to make any difference. But we can influence each other, but not if you feel angry or self-righteous. You'll be more able to influence people politically after reading The Righteous Mind. Whatever your political leaning, you'll learn what the other side cares about, and you'll learn to sympathize with it for real, not pretending like you do, but actually sympathizing with the other side. You'll learn more about your side too. Things have changed. I remember seeing a study where they asked people if you were willing to, would it be okay with you if your kid or married somebody that was from the other party? So liberal couple, would you be okay with your kid marrying a conservative or vice versa? And there's a lot more people now say, no, that would not be okay, than there was 30 years ago. In fact, there's 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, I don't remember how far back it went, when they first did this study, there was a lot of people, when they were asked about race, they said, would it be okay with you if your child married somebody from another race? And back then it was almost everybody said no. And now that is a lot less likely for people to answer that way. And they're more likely to answer, no, I wouldn't want them to marry somebody from the other party. So things have changed, and there's a new kind of prejudice now. And it may be that there's nothing you can do about it. It may be that human beings have a built-in desire to be on a team and to be against another team. And maybe we can just divert all that energy into sports teams or something else. But right now, it's really dividing the country, and not just our country. This is happening all over the world, where there's a democracy anyway, or republic. There's this divide, and it's getting more extreme, and it's not good. So how do we cross this divide? How do we bring our two sides together? Really, the only way to do it is with personal relationships. You personally can do it in your life and with the people that you know and love. And I'm sure you have somebody that you know that you actually are either friends with, or it's in your family, that is from the other side of the aisle. And instead of avoiding that or avoiding the conversation, one thing you can do is form a relationship with them, get to know why they believe the way they do. And Jonathan Haidt actually recommended reading the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, before you do this. And I personally have recommended that book a bunch of times. It's really good for basic human relations. And once you get to know somebody and you get to appreciate their side, and it makes it a lot easier. Let me tell you, if I was you, I would read The Righteous Mind first, and then do this with one or two or three people that you have in your life that are from the other side of the aisle. So you can bridge the gap yourself. And the more of us do that, the better things will be. If more people read The Righteous Mind, where will that lead? I think expressions of extreme single-minded partisanship will more and more be seen for what they are, mere tribalism, and not with judgment. Tribalism is not a judgment. Doesn't have to be anyway, because we all have that tendency. It's our evolutionary inheritance. But the end result would be less division. Hopefully, we will be able to find common ground for the world at large, and maybe especially with the people that we love. This is Adam Lee Kahn on The Atom Bomb.